Welcome. On behalf of GW Law's Environmental and Energy Law program, I'm delighted to welcome our audience and thank you for tuning in today. I especially want to welcome our guests, GW Law alumni Wright Frank and Emily Hildreth. This is the fifth of a series of discussions about careers in energy law and environmental law, and there's more to come. On March 11th, we'll be discussing law and business in the corporate executive suite at noon. And then at 3 p.m., we'll have an overview of the many facets of energy law and private practice. Tapes of these and past interviews are available on our YouTube channel. From the YouTube search bar, search for GW Environmental Law, and you'll find us, and you can subscribe. For today's program, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not in the chat. We'll try to answer as many of those questions as possible, including during the course of the discussion, as well as at the end. Our guests today are at the center of policy development at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, which is part of the Department of Interior. Wright Frank is the acting chief of the policy group, where he is leading the creation of this new unit in the Office of Renewable Energy Programs. The new unit's primary responsibilities will include promoting consistency in decision-making, maintaining a detailed understanding of the regulations, being involved in a broad cross-section of discussions on the program, bringing in historical perspectives to new questions, assisting regional offices in accessing the experiences and practices developed by the program, and taking the lead on cross-cutting issues like the development of guidance documents, standard operating procedures, and regulations. Prior to joining BOEM in 2009, he was with a private law firm. So we'll talk a little bit about that career path as well. Emily Hildreth is a policy analyst in the policy group. In her present position, she is deeply involved in matters related to the application of NEPA to the offshore projects. Her work exemplifies the role of law in the formation of policy and the development of standards needed for consistency and decision-making. Emily built her career in government starting with internships as a student and then as a presidential management fellow. So we'll explore that a little bit today too. So with that, I'd like to welcome our guests. Thank you so much for being here. And Wright, I'd like to kick off with you. Could you give us a little bit of background about what the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management does and what your office in particular does?
In 2005, the Energy EPACT, the Energy Policy Act of 2005, gave the Department of the Interior authority over leases, easements, and rights of way for facilities on the outer continental shelf from sources, the production, transmission of energy from sources other than oil and gas. So that's our kind of legislative mandate. We took a couple of years, but we got regulations out. But yeah, we issue, for now, the important part of that is it's renewable energy. It's offshore wind. And that's been really what we've been focusing our program on for the last, since 2009 when we had our regulations in place. We've had a little bit of current as well, but mostly wind. We've held 7 lease sales? 8 lease sales now. We just had the New York lease sale.
Successful one.
The New York lease sale was a headliner. That was $4.37 billion in high bids, which in dollar terms is the most that the highest grossing lease sale that we've had in oil and gas or renewable energy. Although if you're going to get technical about it, there's a sale or two in the 1980s that, if in inflation adjusted dollars were more, but it's still an incredible, mind-boggling, really. When we started off the program, we were selling them for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they've no doubt in part because of the state programs that are subsidizing offshore wind power. The whole program has grown. I was, I think, the 7th person in the office, and We're up to 65, and if we ever get a budget, it'll be 12 more than that. So the program is growing. It needs to grow. We're all very busy. so uh, we have tons of construction operation plans that we're reviewing. A lot of NEPA, going on.
So we've really seen, I guess, the maturation of the policies in this area. I mean, I can remember back, in I guess around 2000, we were seeing people struggling to do offshore wind, and there just weren't. There was no basis to go forward. There were no regulations. It wasn't even clear who had jurisdiction. So
Yeah.
that's really pretty exciting. Can you talk a little bit about the Office of Policy and why that's needed and what you're doing within there?
We had policy analysts for a while, and for whatever reason, they kind of moved on to other things, and we really needed I was one of those analysts, and when it became obvious that that function was underserved, and when we were doing kind of analyses of what should be added to the program, it was coming up over and over again. It's a group of people who, I think we're 5 people who have a deep kind of a history with the Bureau. So and kind of a skill set that is kind of intellectually ambitious and interested, and always seeking kind of to bring on new things. It's a really dynamic and interesting group of people, and the work we get is amazing. We really have kind of I think it's the most interesting work. Whenever there's a thorny problem or an issue that that's hanging things up or getting things stuck, we come in and look at it, and work with the solicitor's office, work with subject matter experts to try to kind of remove the blockage and get through. And a lot of these things have a legal nexus.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. And maybe, Emily, you could address this a little bit. You're both lawyers, but you're working in a policy office, technically a non-legal position, although obviously heavily informed. Can you talk to us a little bit about how how law and policy come together in your office, and what's attractive to you about this area as a lawyer?
Yeah. So one thing I would really encourage folks to think about if they're interested in public service are these kind of opportunities that aren't just in a solicitor's office or Department of Justice type setting, where you can really work with both policy and legal issues every day. A really easy example for things we're working on right now. We are working on a proposed rulemaking that'll be going out later this year. That's really a pretty wholesale update of the regulations. And, it's people in our office and a lot of our colleagues on the program side who are doing most of the drafting of that regulation, and then, consulting with our solicitors on it. Another thing that I've been working on a lot is we have kind of like a mountain of environmental impact statements to write and put out over the next few years, and it's just going to keep going that way. And one of the things we've been thinking about is one, how to make them efficient, but also two, how to make them consistent. And when you have so many different applications with different subject matter experts from us, different third-party contractors, different applicants, coming together, it can be really easy to end up with potential inconsistencies or miss lessons learned. Right now, I'm working a lot on the development of alternatives. And, sometimes we've been able to figure out that a proposed alternative doesn't work, under our regulatory structure or something like that. And it's a very a broadly applicable situation, but that same issue will come up somewhere else. And so somebody has to kind of keep an eye out for, where that's happening, so that we don't kind of have to reinvent the wheel over and over again about these processes. And I mean, I've been living inside the NEPA regulations, the 40 questions, the proposed rulemaking by CEQ, trying to wonder what their next, rulemaking after this one that's pretty simple they're going to put out is going to be. And, it's very, very tight legal nexus. And I work really, really closely with our attorneys on a lot of this. So there's just a lot of overlap or partnership, I guess, between the policy work. And then the other thing I would say, just as a plug for this kind of work that I think is fun, just as somebody who really came up in both like my university studies and even in law school, I had really like broad interests, not like in science, in public policy, is that we get to work with these biologists, with geophysicists, civil engineers, and we get to work with lawyers too, right? But we're not like sort of, the lawyers are a bit more walled off, to be honest, from the rest of that work. And one of the things I find is just the most fun is to find out like what kind of science our bureau is doing. And we've helped sponsor like some of the best science on like very endangered marine mammal species. And there's now these photos out there that are like, the latest and greatest images and data about that kind of thing. And that's done by my coworkers, and they're people that I know on a first name basis. And for me, that's just a lot of fun. It's really fun to kind of get outside of my own wheelhouse and just, work with people across all these different disciplines.
Well, it's just really fascinating because, I've talked to people that are more on the development side, but you're really at that point where you're both fostering development, but also trying to get government to be efficient and then paying attention to the endangered species. You're really kind of bringing this all together. And what's truly a public service role. I'm just so impressed by the scope of work that you're doing. Um, I would like to also know for each of you, just what is, for a student who's thinking, is this the life that I want? Just on a day-to-day basis, what kinds of issues do you get? What does your day look like in terms of, pressures, time, how the work spreads out over the year? Can you give students a sense of, what it really means to work and the roles that you're in? Right, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I started in a law firm and moved to the government, and a lot of what I noticed was in the very beginning, I would talk to my boss and she would say, here's the fact scenario. We have to make a decision. What should we do? That was not the kind of question I ever got in private practice. It was always go look at 20 years worth of ALJ opinions and tell me what they've said about this. And so it's a much, I don't know, it's nice to have that kind of influence. It was easier for me to get engaged in the work when it was what should we do instead of what can we do legally or what has been said about this legally. So I thought that was great. Government in general, I think working in the government is it's true what they say about it being more friendly. I don't work very often on weekends. I don't work 8-hour days, but it's a lot closer to than I was when I was with private practice. So, and a lot of times I'm coming back to it because there's, after hours, if there's something kind of niggling in my brain that I thought of while I was doing something else and I want to go back to it, it's not because anybody's calling me up and telling me I've got to be on the clock.
Emily, how about you? What does your day look like and how does that workflow spread out for you?
Yeah, I would say I spend probably at least half of my day, most days, working on various written products that involve this kind of hybrid policy, legal analysis type work. Sometimes it's just reviewing things that my other colleagues have put together, that just to kind of do a check from that kind of higher programmatic level. Does everything sort of fit together nicely? Other times it's me really pulling together from the rest of our expertise, new guidance documents. We're working on a new guidance document to help inform applicants for offshore wind a bit more about, what we're really looking for in order to formally initiate the NEPA process. We have guidelines and regs out there, but there's this sort of decision point of, when are we ready to start the EIS process? And we've had a lot of lessons learned from the first round of applications that we're processing. So we're trying to kind of go back and say, okay, what are those really key threshold things that we want to make sure people have, and tell them so that they know what to expect. But a lot of the text in there is not something I just wrote out of my brain. I'm just kind of tying it all together because it takes everyone from like marine acousticians to fisheries biologists and other folks to inform some of the specifics. And then I do engage, it's very like interpersonal work too. It takes a lot of IQ and EQ. I'm working a lot with other agencies, including at a pretty high level, at least at the moment under this administration. I've made presentations to like the General Counsel of CEQ, to the General Counsel of NOAA, among other people. That's been an interesting experience. And also like a fair amount of communication with industry too, and with some of the specific applicants, depending on what kind of issues are coming up. Again, with the NEPA reviews, I kind of cover like all of our projects, and I will sort of lurk, for lack of a better word, in the background sometimes, and on about things that are being discussed between our environmental folks and them, to make sure, like, do we need one of our technical people to like get involved in this? It's like, who else needs to be involved to make sure we're fully understanding whatever a question or concern might be. So there's a lot of just like spotting like who needs to be part of a conversation and pulling them in. That's a role we do quite a bit of. And I guess one other thing that's just been sort of really kind of amazing and sometimes a little terrifying for me is currently our director of BOEM, who is politically appointed, has put a lot of confidence in us. And I mean, she has like entrusted me, with advising her on things that are decisions that are worth, billions of dollars to industry, or, again, making an argument that what we are saying NEPA says is correct and another agency isn't getting it right. And, those kind of things. And those are like really high leverage situations. So it's certainly not boring. I wouldn't call it low pressure either. There is a lot going on. So you have to be comfortable, I think, with some amount of that. But for me, it's part of what's the fun, like Wright was saying, we're doing the substance. I mean, you can kind of see like the work you did last year shows up in the headlines like the following year with some of these projects. And that's a pretty crazy place to be. There aren't that many places in the government, I feel like, where you get to live that out as somebody who isn't, necessarily a political appointee or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think one other point that I would throw in is that when I kind of was planning out my career from law school, my thought was I would find some kind of predictable, and I didn't need to be in like the most sexy field or anything. I was okay with kind of keeping the lights on, doing FERC things, and that's fine, and you can do that. I was thinking that doing something like offshore wind would have been a risk because I felt like that's what everybody would have been wanting to do. But on the other hand, a growing field has more opportunity in it than a static field as well. So I would say don't deliberately stay away from kind of the fun, sexy work because you think you're going to have to kind of push everybody else out of your way to get there.
Yeah, I was kind of reacting to, when Emily was talking about the pressure. I mean, there's a difference between having pressure of like, you've got to do this or else, or versus the kind of pressure that seems that you're feeling, which is, I want to really do well at this. This is an important decision. And so I'm pushing myself
Right.
to excel in this. That's so exciting. So what do you see coming down the road? What are going to be the big developments that we're going to see in offshore wind over the next, say, 5 to 10 years? I mean, this seems to be one of the big areas that we need if we're going to become more renewable.
So on the sales side, we've got more sales coming. The director has been pushing us very hard to come up with new ways in the lease sale process to advance administration priorities like developing the supply chain, and so we've been pushed to be creative on kind of the solutions and what we can do with that. There's more on that. We're also going to be doing a heck of a lot of NEPA. and so we're trying to kind of set the ground rules with other agencies and with trying to get a repeatable process put in place.
How about the West Coast? Are we going to start seeing some development off the West Coast?
We're working toward 2 lease sales on the West Coast, and we've already been talking to them quite a bit on and getting ready for those. They're coming.
Yeah, and my understanding is the West Coast, because it drops off so much dramatically, is really kind of different anchoring technologies, at least. I mean, you're not putting stuff into the seabed floor the way you do on the East Coast. What does that mean to you in terms of, having to develop new policies around that, new NEPA standards? How's that going to impact your work?
It's different effects, different technology, and a lot of it is not. There have been demonstration projects, but there haven't been that many at scale floating wind projects. So yeah, it's just newer and more unknowns, and I think it's up to us to try to figure out how our process works, isn't compatible with a new technology like that. Emily, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible the US might be one of the first places where floating becomes, proven technology. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It really just depends on exactly how the timing plays out with things, but so that's pretty interesting. And it's kind of an opportunity, I think, for the US to catch up. Right now we've really been pulling a lot of lessons learned from Europe, which is just miles and miles and miles ahead. In terms of just having these kind of developments out there and having had them out there for decades, and they have a very sort of proven process for permitting them and connecting them to their grid and all of that. And so we've been able to pick up on those lessons learned, but we're also really playing catch up on the supply chain, on the employment here, people who have any idea what's going on with this technology. So it could be interesting in that floating might be a place where the US actually could have a bit more of an advantage or be on equal footing that way.
Yeah, you also mentioned supply chains, and throughout you've talked a lot about how you interact with other agencies. I'm curious how far your jurisdiction extends. I mean, I know, for example, that one of the issues in the US has been just the problem of having US flagged vessels to be able to bring the pylons. Is that the right word? The piece that has to go down into the
monopiles is the
monopiles.
If it's just one piece, it's a monopile.
How do you interact with other agencies on these really tough supply chain questions?
Yeah, we're okay.
Maybe that's the limits of your jurisdiction. There comes some point where you say,
well,
my problem. No.
there's the limit of what we can do, but we also are meeting regularly with other agencies. I'm thinking of the coordination we're doing with MARAD in the Department of Transportation. They have a loan guarantee program for vessels, and so we've been talking about because we get all of the plans, we probably know as much as anybody about when the demand for certain vessels will be there and what the existing supply looks like in terms of meeting that demand. So we've done some kind of surveying across all the plans to try to see when we think the needs will come up and where. And then we pass that information along to MARAD, which is trying to minimize risk to the taxpayer by not, they will back a loan that is riskier than a bank would back, but they're also, pretty scandal averse as well. So they're also looking to mitigate risk.
that's
So
always
we're helping them with that. And that's on the vessel side. DOE has a whole lot going on. NREL, the National Renewable Energy Labs, has studies going on supply chain and transmission as well. It's another big issue.
We're coming down towards the wire here. I'd like to spend a little time on career paths. Emily, as I mentioned earlier, you did internships as a student, and then you turned to the Presidential Management Fellow program. Could you talk a little bit about that path and what that means to students, how they might be thinking about their careers in government?
Yeah, so I came to law school at GW straight from undergrad. So I did not have a lot of that professional level experience, especially like full-time type work. And one of the ways I felt like I should compensate for that was working a lot, as a student. So both in the summers, but, during the regular school year as well. And I guess I knew that I wanted to pursue some kind of public service when I showed up. So I really focused on that. And over time got to do just like kind of a really, to be honest, like fun sampling of different agencies. And one thing I can say is like the cultures are really, really diverse. The type of work is really diverse. I was at State Department as an intern. That was, it's very interesting, but it's also like incredibly hierarchical. Interior is like sort of almost like the polar opposite, less formal, less hierarchy. And I was at NOAA for a little bit and DOJ, and those are all just like really different lenses. And I think that really prepared me well for then applying to the Presidential Management Fellow program, which is like, it's a very competitive process. And I think it prepared me to be really competitive for the actual positions, because even if you get named a fellow, you actually still have to go and interview for a specific position. One thing I can say is like, it's really just not possible to plan your life out perfectly. I graduated in like the height of the Great Recession as far as legal jobs. And so the competition for the public sector positions had gone like insane, including for the Presidential Management Fellow program. And to be honest, like the first, solid offer I got, I just was like, I'm taking it. Like, this is my entry to the government. And it was like very kind of tangential to what I thought I wanted to do. But now I'm doing something that I would say is like, it's honestly like hand in glove. It's like a perfect fit. It kind of brings together everything I did from almost like from birth or whatever, to now. It kind of feels like I'm in the right place at the right time. So it's like, you just don't know. I mean, along the way, I did a detail at Interior, totally different office. Then I was like one of two people who almost got a permanent position in that office, but didn't get it, felt crushed. But they referred me over to our sister agency, Bessie, who ended up hiring me. And then from there, I made this jump over to BOEM. So it's like, you can just have these weird like setbacks, things that don't feel quite right. Even a job where, I'm going to stay here for just a couple of years and to figure out, where I'm going, that's okay. It doesn't all have to work out perfectly, especially early on, I think, where you're trying to even find out, what do you want from work? And then I think just one other plug I knew I wanted to make is, like Wright was saying, the work-life balance thing. I have a about 20-month-old son and also a about to be 5-year-old. And I'm not gonna like say that that's not without its challenges. My husband works full-time as well. The pandemic has been crazy, but there is support. Both our culture in BOEM is incredibly supportive, and it's a lot of people with families, including people with very young children. So I think everyone understands that your kid gets sick, and whatever you have going on that day, no matter sort of how important it might be, you may just literally not be able to do it, and someone else might have to do it, and everybody kind of gets that. But just more generally, I do think the federal government did offer flexibilities that other places weren't, and we're also like very open on virtual, even post-pandemic. So there's a lot to be said for that, and I just kind of want to mention it because I know for I think women in particular, just because of what comes with parental leave and all of that, and what you're seeing right now with women having left the workforce with the pandemic. It is really like a great place to go, the federal government, and particularly I would say, BOEM itself.
I just want to close out with one other question here for Wright, because that's really helpful, Emily. I really love that whole overlay of, how your career moves, and, it isn't always perfect, but then you find something, it fits. But Right, you took a different route. You started in private practice and came in, and we always get students asking this question about, gee, I don't know which I want. Can I move back and forth between them? You've been with BOEM for what, over 12 years now. During that time, what's your experience been with that? Can people move in and out of private practice, government, back and forth?
Uh, so the experience I got in private practice was valuable in applying to the government. It's not the revolving door thing that you hear about a lot, though. It's not like I see people coming and going from firms a whole lot. I'm sure it happens, and maybe it's happening somewhere else, or maybe I'm just not paying attention to it. But I've seen attorneys, maybe people in the solicitor's office go to private practice more.
That would make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. I would say on what Emily had said about don't worry, about taking what you can and building around that. It's easy to kind of fall into the feeling that everyone knows exactly what they're doing, and they've been on this road forever, and they're just it's the steps up the ladder. In my experience, that is almost always a post hoc rationalization. It's kind of pieced together from convenient facts at a later time. I would not. I'm sure it is like that for certain people. Some people, they want to go to med school and become a doctor, and they just do it. But I think it's very, very common to kind of pull the threads out of your history to kind of build the appearance that you've been doing this. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I have a master's in theoretical linguistics. So I did not just jump on the path to BOEM.
This has been such a delightful conversation. I do see that we are out of time, so I probably need to wrap this up. But I really want to thank both of you. I didn't know you before we embarked on this. I'm so delighted to learn more about what you're doing. And really, I feel very relieved that we have two GW Law alums at BOEM. I feel like we're in very good hands. And I really, really want to thank you for sharing what you have today with our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.